Well, good morning, Crossing Church, and to everyone who's viewing online. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Justin Chandler, and I'm one of the pastors at the Crossing. And maybe you're seeing this video because it's been shared by a friend or a family member, or maybe a coworker, and you're just kind of scrolling through. One of the things we've been doing here at the Crossing Church is, as we've started our new series, Lemons to Lemonade, we've wanted to take some time on the Monday following that weekend series and just have some more conversations about some of the content that got shared this weekend, as well as to be able to kind of continue that conversation. And so here's what I'd love to do today. If you have a Bible, if you could open up to 2 Corinthians chapter 10, we're going to look at verse 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. If you don't have a Bible with you, no worries. I'm going to read it out loud, and there'll be a chance for us to have a conversation about that. But one of the things Andrew talked about this weekend in our series is he talked about what do we do with the criticism that we have a tendency to offer or give towards others, or the criticism that we would receive from others. And he gave three different ways that we'd be able to take some of the teaching he had this weekend and to form some different principles from that. And I'm not going to share those with you right now, right? So for those of you who haven't watched that, you can jump back online, kind of watch through that weekend message and have a chance to do it. But here's what I wanted to do as we follow up with it. One of the great things that happened this weekend that I didn't all expect is, as I've had this kind of habit of using the verse of the day from YouVersion just to kind of do some Bible studies in the morning, the verse that popped up on Saturday, so before the weekend service, was 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and it was verse 5. And it says this, it says, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." So I'll read it one more time for you. "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." Now, initially, like when I read that verse, there were a couple things that I thought about it, but one of the things I do like to do is just kind of read verses that come before it, verses that come after it, and I ended up reading a good portion and all of 2 Corinthians chapter 10. What's unique about it is that really that entire chapter focuses on criticism that Paul, the author of this letter, was receiving. And a number of the feedbacks that he was receiving was like, hey, when he writes letters, right, he seems to be really heavy-handed, but then when he comes in person, like, he doesn't seem to be that way. Or another thing that they would say is like, man, when he writes, he seems to have such eloquent speech and be such a great speaker. And then when we hear him in person, he doesn't seem to be that way. And then there's also we got this impression of him as we read some of his letters, and then we saw him in person. We're like, oh, that really can't be him either. So you could see, he's being criticized in every possible way. And so he starts to say to this church that he's pastoring, he's like, hey, here's how I am going to respond, and here's how I'm going to invite you to respond to some of this criticism. And so he speaks to a couple of those different issues. And what I thought was really great about it is that even just this argument or pretension, right? He's like, hey, anything that would come that way into our lives, we're going to take that down. We're going to remove that. We're going to destroy any of the ways that criticism or critique would start to build walls in our lives or barriers in our lives, not only in our own hearts, but towards others. But the second thing he said, and it's the second part of this sentence that I found to be really helpful for us today, is he said this: we take every thought captive. Right? And so obviously captivity being something I think we can wrap our minds around, but he's like, as a thought comes into our head, or as a thought settles into our heart, like, we want to take it captive. We want to make ourselves obedient to that thought, but we want to say, hey, what is this thing doing? And so specific towards criticism, if you're thinking critically of another person, or if you're allowing the criticism of others to be really in tune into your own heart, that we want to take every one of those thoughts captive. And there's a way for us to say, hey, this thing that I'm thinking, hey, God, is this something that you're asking me to consider, or is this something you're asking me to push away? Or is this something that you want me to really focus on and give attention to, or is this something that instead you'd rather me just remove to the side, right? That there's a way to see both of those. But then the other part of it was that this is we make that thought obedient to Jesus. And so we take it, we hold it, we make it captive, and we say, okay, this thing is going to be obedient to Jesus and the things that Jesus has said, right? Not only for ourselves and our obedience to him, but those thoughts and how they influence us to make it obedient to him. And one of the reasons I think that this is really helpful to me is there's a number of thoughts, perspectives, and ideas about how I should be living today. There's thoughts and perspectives about how I should be spending my time, how I should be a husband, how I should be a father, how I should be a pastor, how I should be a speaker, how I should dress, what I should do with my hands when I'm talking because I don't know what to do with my hands. All of those things come up. And as true as it is of that, there are moments where there's just so much information, one that's not going to ever really be helpful. But then the other side of it is the real feedback and criticism or critique that would benefit me, I could end off pushing to the side because I'm just too concerned about the volume, or I don't want to hear something from somebody. And so here's what I would encourage you today. It's just a little thing that I think would be helpful to every one of us is like, what if we even started today, and whatever you may think or feel and know about yourself, like what if you just opened your hands up and said like, hey God, I want to make every thought obedient to you. I want to take every thought and I want to make it captive. And I want you, God, to be the one who speaks and to point to things that I need to know. Like, what if you just said like, hey God, is there anything in my heart? Is there anything in my life? Is there anything that you want to speak to me today and that you would want to provide some feedback on, or you would want to be critical towards? Like, God, is there anything in there? And I think if you just gave yourself a couple minutes of quiet and just sat down, maybe even after this video, or you found some time later on in the day, and you just sat down and quiet and said, hey God, is there anything in there for me? I think that you would find that you'd hear God's voice right into whatever that is, that we would say like, I want to take every thought and I want to make it captive, right? I want to make myself obedient to Christ, and all the arguments, all the pretension, all the ideas, all the different ways that are out there of what I could do. Instead, I'm going to submit myself to God and I'm going to find out what I should do. And so I want to again say thanks so much for joining this morning. It's been a real honor just to be able to follow up from this weekend. Again, jump back online so you can catch the 3 points that Andrew shared. And I look forward to spending every day with you online and also this weekend as we continue our series, Lemons to Lemonade. We'll see you soon.